Chapter 1651. Nothing, I just want to ask Ken where he got the information from. I never mentioned that I'm friends with the Goldman girl. Ken smirked when she denied it. Not friends? She seems to be protective of you. He meant the last time he had met Daisy. Freya didn't answer. Sandy looked at her. Faye, you're my daughter, your brother's sister. You don't care about your family, but seem to be concerned about the Knowles. I know that you're in touch with Noel Ace, but he's a Knowles. You would ignore your family just because he lent you a helping hand? Freya pressed her lips together and asked, but isn't Aunt Diana your family? Enough. She threw the teacup, and it smashed into pieces at her feet. Sandy didn't look friendly. Is that how you speak to your mother? Mother, please calm down. Ken fixed his suit and stood up. Why not let me speak to her? She rubbed her temple and closed her eyes, then stopped speaking. Ken motioned for her to go upstairs. They went into the study, and Freya was blunt. You asked me to come so that I could plead for you? Your fiancé is the reason the Reeses are in this situation. Ken walked behind the desk, sat in the leather seat, and lit up a cigarette. I no longer care about the Reeses. What do you mean? His eyes cleared up as he stared at her face. It's what it means. If the Reeses are crumbling, and I can't stop it, I might as well give up. Freya couldn't believe it and felt that it was funny. If you gave up sooner, your wife wouldn't have died during childbirth, and Dee Dee wouldn't turn into a child without a mom and abandoned by her father. Ken's eyes grew dark, and the cigarette between his fingers burned. He took a long drag and crushed half of the rest in the ashtray. If you were good enough to be associated with the Goldmans, I might not have needed to get involved with the Reeses. That wasn't why you abandoned Dee Dee. Freya, you're not me, so you have no right to make comments about my life. Ken threw the document on the desk to the floor and yelled, I was born 6 years earlier than you, and I had to face all the pressure just because I was the eldest son. You had it much easier. I gave up on going to college and entered society earlier because I wanted to do well and didn't want to be looked down on. Do you know how hard I've worked to get where I am? Do you know what people say about us behind our backs? We were the result of an affair and could only hide away. You don't need to face all that hostility in school because nobody knows who you are. I've been mocked, looked down on, and had to be shamed. I'm just one step away. Freya balled up her fist. So, because of all that, your wife and Dee Dee aren't innocent? He took a deep breath. Benefits should always come before relationships. As for Dee Dee, I never wanted her, but she insisted on bringing her to full term. Freya ran up to him and grabbed his collar. How could you say all that? Ken pushed her away. All you need to do now is to gain Daisy's trust. You're part of our family, so it's time to do your part. Freya was so angry, she trembled. We're not friends. Chapter 1652. Not friends, or do you just don't think that way? Ken walked closer. Noel Ace asked you to stay by her side so that he can keep an eye on Daisy. I know you informed Noel Ace when he went to the restaurant the other day. Freya bit her lip and didn't answer. Ken loosened his tie and turned around. You have two options, get close to the Goldmans, or let me arrange for your marriage. Ryan Matthews is ready to remarry. Ken ignored Freya's shocked expression. Even though the Matthews aren't as great as the Reeses, his grandfather was a duke, so you should think about it. Ken left the study, leaving Freya still in shock. This family felt foreign to her. She was afraid and stressed out, so she wanted to run away. At the Hilton Villas, the housekeeper prepared breakfast in the morning. Daisy chatted with her while having breakfast. The housekeeper lived nearby, and her husband was from Yarramore. She was a housewife, so other than sending her children to school and picking them up after, she had a lot of time on her hands. This was a part-time job, and it was convenient. After she finished, the housekeeper cleaned up the kitchen and left. Daisy picked up her bag while two bodyguards waited for her in front of the car. The car drove toward Victoria, and she lazily leaned against the window. Are you picking me up in the evening too? They said yes. Daisy pouted but didn't say anything. The car stopped on campus. She got out of the car, and everyone walking by turned to look at her and then chattered. The Reeses were in trouble because of her, and she immediately became the legend of the school because of that. Not everyone would have the power to bring down a noble family. She bumped into Freya and was going to greet her when Freya ignored her, turned around, and left. Daisy thought Freya didn't see her, so she ran after her. Freya. She stopped in her tracks and turned around. Yes? She seemed colder than usual. Daisy pressed her lips together. Are you all right? Yes, I'm going to class now. She didn't look back and just walked away. Daisy watched her walk away, then looked down. She felt that something had happened to her. She walked into the classroom, and a few people were talking about the Reeses. When they saw Daisy, they approached her. I heard that Lara Reese had gotten what she deserved, did you know? She paused. What happened? Her face was ruined. Yes, I heard that when she left home, a crazed fan splashed acid on her face and half of it melted. It was on the news. Maybe because nobody liked Lara, nobody felt sorry that that happened to her. Lara had done that to an actress before, and now that karma had gotten to her, everyone was alright with it. Daisy was a little shocked. Seeing how they were happily discussing that, she didn't say anything but went back to her seat. Lara was in the hospital. She had 2 skin graft surgeries, and when she woke up, she broke the mirrors in her room while crying. Half her face was bandaged because it was ruined. Even after surgery, she wouldn't get her old face back. Her beauty that she was so proud of was gone. Ken walked into the room with a bouquet of flowers, and Lara stopped crying. Now that she was at her lowest and had lost all her friends, only Ken remembered her, and that made her cold heart warm up a little. Chapter 1653. Lara hugged Ken. Ken, I knew you wouldn't abandon me. I was wrong. I shouldn't have yelled at you. I have nothing now except you. Ken listened to her patiently and cupped her face after a moment. I brought your favorite lilies. Lara smiled with tears in her eyes. You remember. He looked down with no joy in his eyes. I used to be a son-in-law of the Reeses, of course, I would remember. Lara suddenly understood what he meant. His hand rested on her chin. If you had listened to me, this wouldn't have happened. Lara shuddered and grabbed his arm. I've learned my lesson, Ken. Please help me. She begged. If you save me, my dad will give you anything you want when we're married. Ken held her hand and pushed her away. The Reeses have lost their power. You're no longer useful to me. She couldn't believe it. What? Ken loosened his tie and placed the bouquet on the table. I guess I didn't make it clear enough. I never loved you. All I wanted were the benefits your family could bring me. Now that you're no longer who you were, why would I marry a disfigured woman? Lara was very emotional and furious. Ken Pruitt. Ken smiled and leaned closer to her with no expression on his face. You should be glad that I got someone to ruin your face. If it were no lace, I'm afraid it wouldn't be as simple as your face that was destroyed. That sentence made Lara's pupils shrink and start shaking. After Ken left, Lara sat there on her bed. She had lost everything. Love and sweet words were an illusion. She screamed as if she had lost her mind and threw a pillow. The pillow fell at a girl's feet. She walked forward when she saw Lara, crying with her face in her hands, and handed her a tissue. Miss Reese, don't be sad. We both have the same enemy. At the Knowles group. Edison reported the disfigurement of Lara to Knowles. He had the side of his head on his hand while tapping the other hand on the desk in deep thought. The Reeses were exposed and had lost their power. Even though they had paid the price, it wasn't enough. He didn't plan to let Lara, who was the reason Daisy was injured, go so easily. What made people suffer the most wasn't death, but living in a situation worse than death. Sir, now that Miss Reese is disfigured, Mr. Donald Matthews probably won't marry her. Donald Matthews was the only male heir of the Matthews, the grandson of a duke. Even though they weren't as great as the Reeses, who were royals, they were much more well-known. Especially Donald. He was a hidden shareholder of the underground market of Yarramore, 34 years old, and married thrice. The first wife had passed away in a car accident while 5 months pregnant. The cause of the accident was unknown. The second and third wives were still alive, but one of them was abused and had mental issues. She lived in a care home. The other one was forced to work in the black market as an escort and had suffered a heart attack. Donald loved beautiful young women but got bored of them quickly. Once he was done with them, they wouldn't have a happy ending. Knollys found out from the people of the black market that Lara was the woman that Donald wanted the most. He loved how seductive she was, but too bad she was a Reese. Thus, even if he wanted her, he couldn't just get her. Chapter 1654. Donald wanted to help the Reeses now that they had lost their power so that he could get the woman he wanted. He knew that old man Reese would rather be poor than be connected with the Matthews. Unfortunately, Lara was disfigured. Edison remembered something. By the way, Ken went to visit her at the hospital today. Nala's finger paused and looked up. Ken would have distanced himself from the Reeses after their downfall. He doesn't seem like someone who cares about being kind. His relationship with Lara was all about power, and now that that was no longer on the table, Lara was useless to him. Unless he had other plans. Daisy waited for Freya after class downstairs. Freya walked to the door and saw her standing at the button of the stairs, waving at her. Daisy walked along with her. Freya, did something happen to you? She stopped walking and looked down in silence. Daisy looked at her. Freya? Daisy Vanderbilt, we should keep our distance. You no longer stay at the dormitory, so we're no longer roommates, and especially not friends. Freya walked past her and left. Daisy paused while she watched her leave. Colton saw this from afar and frowned. He walked toward Daisy and stopped behind her. I've warned you. Do you see it now? Daisy snapped back, looked up at Colton, and then looked back down. After a moment, she said, we never said we were friends. Freya had never said that she was her friend. They were just roommates. Then why do you care? It was fine now that it had ended. It at least stopped before it became like Lisa's case. Daisy looked up and parted her lips. Colton, she's different from Lisa. Colton crossed his arms and smirked. How are they different? Daisy didn't reply but looked where Freya had disappeared in deep thought. After some time, she tugged at Colton's sleeve. Colton, can you help you find out how Freya has been recently? Colton wasn't very happy about that. My time shouldn't be spent on her. Just help me this once. Colton took a deep breath and ground his teeth. Just this once. That evening, at the Hilton Villas, Daisy showered and was drying her hair with a towel when her phone on the desk started vibrating. She received a text. She picked up the phone and saw that it was from Knollys. N, have you had dinner? D, yes, have you? After a few minutes, Knollys replied. N, not yet. D, why? N, I was thinking about you. Daisy blushed and threw her towel down. Why is he teasing me? Maybe because she took a while to reply, he called. Daisy answered it in her flustered state. Knollys couldn't help but chuckle. You picked up really quickly. She choked. I didn't mean to pick up. Really? He smiled. His voice was deep and sounded so nice. You can hang up now. Daisy paused, then breathed through her nose. I should hang up because you tell me to? He smiled. I know, you don't want to. Chapter 1655. Daisy suddenly felt that she wasn't strong enough because it was so easy for him to get to her. Do you want to see me? I don't live in the dormitory anymore. I know. Daisy chuckled. How did you know? Knollys laughed. Because I'm downstairs. Daisy looked out her window, and a car was parked nearby with the window rolled halfway down. She immediately recognized a familiar face. The evening sun shone from the horizon and splashed across the western sky. Daisy went outside in a loose dress and a thin jacket. Nole stood next to his car. He had a tall frame with perfect proportions, which was in a shirt that looked extra nice under the evening sun. He looked mature, handsome, and charming. Daisy was a little too mesmerized by that and fell into his arms because she tripped. Nole held her by her waist and ran his hand over her dark, smooth hair. "There's no need to rush. I'm not leaving." He couldn't help but chuckle. Daisy buried her face in his chest. "Don't laugh." He stopped while he looked at the bodyguard standing not too far away. The bodyguard stared at them and realized he shouldn't move forward, especially now. Nole looked back down at her. "I'm happy just to see you." She looked down. "You're busy and have to be both in college and at work." Nole almost never stepped foot in college recently. She could feel that she had been seeing him less after they started dating. Nole held her hand and placed it to his lips. "It will be great once you graduate." She looked up at him. "Why?" He smiled. "I'll be able to see you every day once I marry you." Daisy was hesitant. "Do we need to get married so soon?" After getting married, babies would follow, and she wouldn't be able to do whatever she wanted. Seeing how worried she was, Nole cupped her face. "We'll get married first. I won't stop you if you want to be in showbiz. You can do whatever you want." As long as they were married and she was his wife, she wouldn't be able to run away, and others wouldn't have a chance either. But, getting married would mean. Nole squinted while she said with blushed cheeks, "Having babies." Nole leaned in half an inch and stared at her. "Don't worry about babies. I'll control myself." Daisy was surprised. "Can you control that?" He chuckled. "You'll find out when it happens." She understood, but her face burned up. The biology classes were clear. Having a baby wasn't just about sleeping together. She pushed him away and mumbled, "We've met, so I'm going back in." She escaped so quickly that Nole couldn't help but smile. He would make her his own once she graduated. By the time Nole got home, the night had fully descended. The living room was empty. His father had gone back to the palace with his mother, and Tristan wasn't there either. He removed his coat and went upstairs. Lisa walked out of her room at that moment and seemed to have picked this time just so that she could bump into him. She wore a thin silk dress that was very revealing, as if that was the only thing that she was wearing. Nole's face dropped, and his eyes grew cold. Even though Lisa was afraid of him, Tristan had agreed to let her back in. Nole had accepted it, so she became braver. "You're back, Nole." Chapter 1656. Nole let out a cold smirk and said, "It seems like you learned something as well when you were in the black market." He walked past her and left. Lisa's smile froze when she heard his sarcastic remark, and she bit her lower lip. Even though she had not done it out of her own volition when she was in the black market, she felt it was not entirely unacceptable after trying it. It was painful at first, but once the pain subsided, it was a completely different feeling. She was certain that no man in this world would be able to resist this. The reason Nole refused to accept her was that he hadn't tried it before. If she got him, maybe he would fall in love with the feeling as well. Nole returned to his bedroom, and just after changing into his pajamas, he heard someone opening the door to his room. He turned around and frowned. His gaze turned cold as he growled, "Get out of my room." Lisa pretended that she did not hear what he said and closed the door. Her face turned red as she took off her clothes one after another until she stood naked in front of him. "Nole, I can do everything that Daisy can't do. I promise that you'll fall in love with this feeling after tonight." Lisa stood naked in front of Nole. There was nothing but an undergarment on her body, and she was certain no man would be able to resist such a feast as long as they had feelings. Unfortunately, Nole was different. He did not like her at all, and he would never look at her. His anger slowly abated, and his usual calm returned to him. Lisa stretched her arm forward in an attempt to hug him, but Knoles turned around and avoided her before she could touch him. I didn't think that you would fall to such a low level. Feeling humiliated, Lisa gritted her teeth and said, why can Daisy do it, and I can't? Knoles frowned and tapped lightly on the keyboard on the desk. What makes you think that you can be compared to her? You aren't worthy enough to carry Daisy's shoes. Lisa's shoulders trembled. She had cast away her embarrassment and lay herself bare in front of him. He was a man as well, but why did he not have any reaction toward her? Lisa refused to accept it as she pounced at Knoles, hugging him from the back. Knoles, why can't you just give me a chance? I can do anything you want, and I'll only listen to you in the future. Knoles chuckled. The calmer and less angry he was, the more dangerous he became. Lisa couldn't see through his emotion right now, but she refused to let go of such a precious opportunity. Nolly. It seems like I have overestimated you. It took you hard enough to return to the Knolls. Honestly, there are plenty of ways if you want to stay in the Knolls, but you had to choose this method. You truly are one of the most idiotic people I have ever seen. Lisa was stunned. Knoles looked in a certain direction and continued. Why don't you look up and see over there? At the moment she raised her head, she froze. There was a camera with a red flashing light at the corner of the wall, which happened to fall in the blind spot of her vision. Lisa took a big step back and picked up the gown on the floor to cover herself. Her face turned ashen pale as she looked at Knoles incredulously. How could you? She thought she could take Knoles down since nobody was home tonight. As long as she could make Nolans hers, let alone the Knolls, she could easily kick Daisy away from her sight. However, she did not expect that Knoles would install a camera in his room. Who was he guarding against? Was it her? Knoles turned sideways and looked at her calmly. Why do you think my uncle brought you back to the Knolls? Do you really think you can threaten the Knolls just because I was the one who sent you to the black market? Chapter 1657. Lisa trembled when she heard what Knoles said. Her teeth chattered so much that she couldn't finish her sentence. I admit that it's quite realistic when you put on that suicide act, but if you really wanted to die, you should have cut deeper. Knoles pulled the pen drive out of his computer and continued. Honestly, I should thank you. If it hadn't been for you, I wouldn't have such a fabulous video to show to my uncle. The adopted daughter of the Knolls is trying to seduce the descendant of the Knolls. I can't wait to see my uncle's reaction when he sees this recording. No. Lisa was filled with fear. Her voice was thick with a sob as she pleaded, I'm sorry, Knoles. My emotions just got the best of me, and I promise I won't do it again. Peter. No sooner had Knoles' voice died away, Peter pushed the door open and came inside. Lisa's face sank when she saw Peter. She did not expect him to be here the entire time. Knoles handed the flash drive to Peter and said, give this flash drive to my uncle. Knoles, do you really have to do this to me? Are you not worried that I might kill myself? Lisa's voice became sharp and ear-grating due to her nervousness. Knoles looked at her expressionlessly and said, if you want to kill yourself, then go ahead. Lisa froze. Knoles stopped in front of her and looked down at her. Aren't you good at manipulating the public voice? Didn't you want to threaten me? You know that the Knolls would do everything to protect their reputation, and casting you away without any reason is tantamount to ingratitude and injustice. The reason I let you live here is that I want to see what kind of tricks you still have up your sleeves. Unfortunately, this is all you have in your arsenal. I guess it's only fair and reasonable for the Knolls to cast you out. He waved his hand after he finished speaking. Receiving his order, Peter picked Lisa up from the floor and dragged her out of his room. There was a group of maids in the living room. When they saw Peter dragging the disheveled Lisa down, they began to talk to each other, and there was a hint of disdain in their eyes. Knoles changed into a shirt and long pants before he came downstairs. Upon seeing him, Lisa crawled toward him and cried, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Please let me go. I won't do it again. I won't come back here anymore, okay? Please, please let me go. Knowles took a step back and avoided Lisa. He sat with his legs crossed on the couch and looked at Lisa expressionlessly. My uncle was kind enough to take you in as his adopted daughter. However, not only did you not appreciate his kindness, but you even went inside my room and attempted to seduce me. This is something unacceptable, and the Knowles can't keep you anymore. Oh gosh, how can she be so shameless? She's still so young. No wonder she's disheveled. She's really such a whore. The comments from the side stabbed into her heart like sharp knives. From the moment she cast away her shame and seduced Knowles, she had already fallen into his trap. Just like Knowles said, she was good at manipulating the public voice. She was also good at putting herself in a vulnerable position to gain sympathy from the public. The fact that Knowles sent her to the black market and indirectly caused her to lose her chastity was a great weapon she could use against the Knowles. She had been under the impression that as long as she had this weapon in her hands, she would be able to coerce the Knowles into letting her back by putting up a suicide act. She thought she was smart, but she did not expect that it was her cleverness that caused her to lose her greatest weapon and bring her doom. At that moment, Tristan returned. When he saw the scene in the living room, he was stunned, and his face sank. What is going on here? Lisa slumped to the floor and froze. Peter walked up to Tristan and told him everything. Tristan fell silent for a moment, and then his gaze turned sharp as he looked at Lisa. Godfather. I made a mistake, but I did it because I love Nolly too much. Is it wrong of me to love him? Lisa cried as she clung to her last hope. Chapter 1658. Lisa only needed to make it look like she did so, because she loved Knowles too much. She was certain that her godfather would understand her. Have you gone out of your mind? Tristan growled, his voice thick with anger. Lisa froze on the spot when she realized that Tristan was shouting at her. I took you under my wing because I pitied you, and you saved my life. However, I didn't ask you to do such a shameless thing in the Knowles mansion. It seems like Knowles is right about you. Letting you live here is the worst decision I've made. Lisa's pupils constricted. But I saved your life. Talking about that. Tristan paused for a few seconds, and his face sank. I made a rash decision 4 years ago. It never occurred to me that the accident turned out to be a scheme. Her body began to shake, and her face turned bloodless. However, she knew she couldn't admit it as she said, How can you suspect me? I was only 14 years old that year. There's no way I'm capable of such schemes. It's true that you're incapable of such schemes. Knowles, who had been keeping silent the whole time, parted his lips and chimed in. But it doesn't mean the people behind you aren't incapable of that. Lisa turned to look at him, and there was a fearful expression on her face. What are you talking about? Do you still remember Evan? Lisa was stumped when she heard the name. She had never mentioned her brother in front of the Knowles, so she wondered how they knew about him. Knowles rose to his feet and walked across the table. He stopped in front of her and looked down at her. In order to prevent getting rid of him as well as to stop him from coming to you after you've become rich, you asked the people behind you to eradicate him. However, he was lucky and didn't die. Perhaps God took pity on him as he accidentally learned everything that you did. Lisa did not dare to look him in the eyes since she was exposed. She bit her lips so tightly that blood was seeping out of the wound. You can even harm someone who's related to you by blood. I wonder what else you wouldn't dare to do. I didn't. It wasn't me. She refused to admit it. Well, it doesn't matter if you refuse to admit it. I already know what I should know, and as for you. Knowles glanced at her coldly, leaned over to her, and said in a voice that only she could hear. Either find a place and die alone, or I'll send you to the person you fear most. Lisa was stumped. Her heart stopped beating for a moment, and cold beads of sweat began to fill her forehead. She cried, but in the next second, she laughed. Her eyes were slowly turning bloodshot as she hissed, If Daisy learns how terrifying you are, I'm sure she'll stay as far as possible away from you. Nolace narrowed his eyes dangerously. As he straightened his body, he signaled at Peter. Peter dragged Lisa up from the floor, and this time, she did not struggle anymore. It was raining heavily outside, and Lisa was thrown out of the mansion along with her belongings. She stood in the rain with only a flimsy layer of clothes. Her eyes were filled with rage and resentment as she watched the door slowly close before her. Do you really think I'll kill myself just like that? No, never. I will stay alive, and I want to make sure that all of you will regret everything you did to me. In the study room, Nolace stood in front of the window and watched as Lisa pulled her luggage away in the rain. Tristan was standing next to him. He retracted his gaze and asked, Nolace, I'm sure she won't die just like that. Are you sure it's the right decision to let her go? Of course, I didn't think she'd find a place and kill herself. Nolace turned around. There was a smile on his face, but the smile did not reach his eyes. I let her go, because it's about time for me to reel in the net. Tristan frowned. Do you want to lure the people behind her out? He turned around and asked, didn't your people find Evan already? With him acting as our smokescreen, I'm sure the people behind her will show up soon. At the Victoria Business College. Hey, the Knowles have disowned their adopted daughter. Chapter 1659. Yeah, I saw the news, and they're pretty serious about it. I heard that girl tried to seduce young Mr. Knowles last night. I don't understand where she got the courage to go into his room naked. She has fallen low enough to give the people in the black market permission to take videos of her doing that kind of thing, so I don't find it strange that she would try to seduce young Mr. Knowles. Colton happened to pass by the corridor when he heard their conversation. He squinted, and when he thought about those videos that he had uploaded to the internet that time, he felt revolted. Nolace had sent him those recordings, so he figured that Nolace must have something to do with it. He had to admit that Nolace was indeed more ruthless than he was when it came to punishing his enemy. There were two things that a girl like Lisa cared about the most, reputation and chastity, and Nolace had completely crushed both of them. Colton. Daisy's voice pulled him back to reality. He turned his head around to see that Daisy was running toward him. Have you found it? She was talking about Freya. Colton stuck his hands into the pockets and said gloomily, why does it seem to me that you care about her a lot? You promised that you would find it for me. Yes, I found it. There's nothing out of the ordinary. Other than going to class, the only place she goes is her dormitory and nothing else. After Phrygia got up from bed, she would only go to two places, class and her dormitory. She did not even go to the canteen. It seemed like she was all alone wherever she went and had no contact with anyone else. If it weren't for his sister, Colton wouldn't have spent his time on such a boring person. Daisy lowered her head and mumbled, then why? Phrygia deliberately avoided her. Even though she tried to talk to her, she would just ignore her. However, she did not badmouth her behind her back, and based on that alone, Daisy believed that she was different from Lisa. Colton looked at her and said, well, it's good to stay away from her. Besides, her brother has had a relationship with the Reeses before. He isn't someone you can handle. The Reeses had already gone down the hills. Ken had lost his only support, so Colton was sure that he wouldn't let go of other opportunities. However, Daisy ignored him and said, oh yeah, how can I forget about her jackass brother? She grabbed Colton's arm and continued. Colton, I think Ken must have threatened her. I'll go look for her now. Daisy. Colton tried to stop her, but to no avail. He put his hand on his forehead, and the veins on the back of his hand bulged. He did not know if it was a good thing or not to have a nosy little sister. Phrygia had just finished making spaghetti in her dorm when the door was pushed open from the outside. Huffing and puffing, Daisy stood at the door and said, I knew you'd be here, Freya. Freya was stunned for a few seconds before she lowered her head. What did you come back for? I come back to look for you. Freya froze, but she soon regained her usual calm self after a few seconds. How can I help you then? Daisy then went straight to the point and asked, did Ken threaten you? Freya was taken aback and jerked her head up. You, I knew it. You're avoiding me because of your jackass brother, right? Daisy said with confidence. Freya let out a laugh, and then her face suddenly turned stern. Daisy, do you really have to be such a busybody? Who do you think you are to poke into my affairs? In case you forgot, we're not friends. I didn't say we're friends. Daisy shrugged. We're roommates. Freya retracted her gaze and continued. But you're not staying here. Standing akimbo, Daisy said, my stuff is here, so I'm still living here. As long as this bed belongs to me, we're roommates. Chapter 1660. Freya was stumped. None of them spoke for a long while, and then a chuckle broke the silence. Daisy frowned. What are you laughing at? You, of course. You looked funny just now. Freya held her laugh back and looked at her. So what if we're roommates? It doesn't mean you can. Do you want me to expose your true identity? Freya was rendered speechless. She couldn't hold herself anymore and rose to her feet. Are you threatening me? Yeah, I'm threatening you. I'm going to tell everyone in the college that the kid is your brother's daughter, and you're just helping him to take care of her. Freya chuckled and asked, are you not worried that he will come to you for trouble? Daisy crossed her arms in front of her chest and replied, that's exactly what I would want him to do. I'm not afraid of trouble. After all, this isn't the first time I've been in trouble. Freya was stunned. Initially, she planned to ignore her and give her the cold shoulder to force her to stay away from her. However, her plan failed. A smile broke across Freya's face as she took her seat. This is the first time I've noticed that you're really tenacious. Daisy walked up to her and took the seat next to her. So, what did Ken threaten you with? Freya lowered her head. After a short while, she turned her head to look at Daisy and said, if I tell you that he has an ulterior motive for asking me to approach you and be friends with you, what will you think? Daisy was stumped and fell silent. Freya sighed. But I didn't want to do that. He has nothing to do with the Reeses anymore since they fell from their graces for messing with you. However, he won't give up just like that. If I gain your trust, they'll stop at nothing to squeeze every last drop of benefit out of you. They'll even make you their puppet to get what they want. Daisy was a descendant of the Goldmans. Everyone held her dearly, and there was nothing the Goldmans couldn't get for her. After falling silent for a while, Daisy asked, so, you're worried that they will take advantage of me? Freya chuckled. With your brothers and Nolace by your side, do you think they'll get what they want? They're not stupid people. Daisy was gullible, but it did not mean that the Goldmans were gullible. Freya was not an idiot either. If she really helped Ken, things might not turn out as they wished. Most importantly, she did not want to do it either. Daisy felt that Freya was hinting at something and mumbled, I'm not that stupid either. If you weren't stupid, would Lisa have been able to abuse your kindness? Daisy was stumped and turned her head away. Those are in the past. I'm different now. Suddenly, Freya went closer to her and asked, have you read the news? What news? Your ex-bitch bestie stripped herself naked and tried to seduce your boyfriend last night. When Daisy came out of the building, her face was dark. She did not know about the news, but she was angry after learning what Lisa had done. Also, Freya had told her that no man would be able to resist such a temptation. If he could, there probably was something wrong with him. She felt Freya was right, and a sense of crisis rose from her heart. Did Lisa do that last night? When the thought surfaced in Daisy's head, her heart was filled with rage. She turned to an unknown car at the roadside and kicked the tire hard. It was only when the window of the back seat was rolled down that Daisy knew whose car was this. Nolace let out a chuckle when he remembered how Daisy kicked the tire exasperatingly. If you want, I can ask the driver to deflate the tire. You don't have to kick it like that. Daisy turned her head around and ignored her. Nolace got out of the car and pulled her into his arms. As a smile appeared on his face, he asked, what's wrong, Daisy? She turned her face sideways and said, "I'm angry." Nullace turned her body over and looked at her puffed cheek intently. "Who made you angry?" Without saying anything, she pointed at him.